Hey guys, tonight we trudge back into the dusty shadows of ancient battlefields where forgotten warriors once clashed, their names swallowed by time, their stories barely whispered in history books. You probably won't survive this journey through the grit and grime of forgotten conflicts. But hey, you might just uncover some fierce fighters who rewrote the rules of warfare without a single fanfare. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who's joining me on these late night adventures. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a dusty plain under a burning sun, the scent of scorched earth filling your nostrils. Around you, the remnants of an ancient battlefield lie scattered rusty weapons, half-buried crumbling shields, and bones bleached by centuries of neglect. This is no place for glory, but for the silent warriors whose fierce spirit was never etched in marble or sung in epic poems. Among these forgotten fighters are the hoplites of ancient Greece, not the famous generals or kings, but the ordinary citizen soldiers who form the backbone of armies. You might recall the tales of Sparta and Athens, but historians still argue whether these common men, often farmers or craftsmen, bore the brunt of battle more than their leaders. It's their grit, their unyielding shield walls that defined entire wars. They fought in phalanxes, tightly packed formations that seemed almost impenetrable, yet their names vanished as quickly as the dust kicked up by their marching feet. Now imagine a soldier from the Indus Valley civilization dating back over 4,000 years. Archaeologists uncovered remnants of massive fortified cities and evidence of weapons that suggest these ancient warriors defended their homelands fiercely. But beyond the ruins, their personal stories are lost, their identities erased. You can almost hear the faint clanking of bronze swords, but no chronicler ever penned their deeds. The ancient world was vast, and its memory selective. Here's a quirky fact. In ancient Egypt, some soldiers wore amulets shaped like crocodile dung as a bizarre form of sunscreen and spiritual protection. Yes, you read that right. Whether that worked or just smelled terrible is still debated among historians and scientists. These warriors weren't just muscle. They were part of complex societies with codes, honor, and fears not unlike your own. Yet they walk the earth of history as shadows named only by the battles they fought, if at all. You might think ancient battles were all about clashing swords and loud war cries, but many were chaotic, messy, and often decided by luck or weather. Historians still argue whether the famous Battle of Kadesh was really a stalemate or a strategic masterstroke by Ramses II. Your mind wanders to the idea that bravery doesn't need a name etched in stone to matter. These forgotten warriors, those nameless hoplites, the unsung defenders of Indus cities, carry the pulse of human resilience. So next time you read about epic battles, remember those who fought, unseen their stories, a silent drumbeat beneath the roaring crowds of history. You notice how history loves heroes with fancy titles and monuments, but real grit comes from those without a throne or a name etched in gold. Imagine how many battles hinged on a single farmer gripping a spear, fighting to protect a home he'd never write about. And yet you're here tracing their invisible footsteps giving them a breath of life on this quiet night. The truth is, some warriors were so unsung because they lived in times when writing was a privilege of the elite. Many fought and died without anyone to sing their praises. The harsh realities of ancient wars, disease, starvation, and brutal close combat were shared equally by all, but only a handful make it into our collective memory. Interestingly, some ancient warriors used psychological tactics, so ahead of their time, they'd make modern strategists nod in approval. The Spartan phalanx wasn't just a wall of shields, it was a psychological weapon intimidating enemies with unity and discipline. Historians still debate how much of Sparta's power came from this fear factor versus sheer numbers. And then there's that strange Egyptian sunscreen made from crocodile dung amulets. Science calls it bizarre, but to the soldiers, it was sacred protection. Imagine trudging through a desert battlefield with that hanging from your neck, half confident it keeps you safe, half wondering about the smell. You're not just walking with ghosts here. You're glimpsing into human endurance and the unrecorded valor that shaped civilizations. These warriors, though nameless, echo loudly in the foundations of the world you know. Tonight, honor their silent courage. Pause for a moment and picture the cacophony of a battle. But here's the kicker. The people who won't show up in the history books are often the ones who bore the most. The ones who stood their ground in the mud, whose cries were lost in the chaos. They weren't kings or generals. They were farmers, blacksmiths, ordinary folks pulled into extraordinary moments. Some of these warriors fought in wars that shifted the course of history, yet their names vanished like smoke on the wind. Take the Battle of Marathon, for instance. While we remember the run and the victory, countless soldiers who marched and fought alongside the famed Pheidippides remain nameless. Historians still argue about the real number of casualties and the unsung stories buried beneath the grandeur. And what about the weapons? Some of these fighters wielded bronze swords that weighed more than today's kitchen knives. Their craftsmanship lost to time. You can almost imagine the clang of metal on metal, the sweat running down brows under helmets made of leather and bronze. You might laugh at how some armies relied on what we'd consider bizarre war gear. There's evidence that certain warriors used animal bones and shells as armor, primitive, sure, but effective in close combat. It's a reminder that innovation in battle comes not just from kings, but from necessity. In the end, these forgotten warriors remind you that history isn't just about grand narratives and famous faces. It's about the countless unnamed souls whose courage and blood paved the way for the world as you know it. As you settle down tonight, carry their silent bravery with you, a whispered legacy from the shadows of time. You wake up from the echoes of ancient battles, only to find yourself stepping into the grand but often overlooked world of hidden queens behind empires, those regal women whose power was formidable, yet whose names and deeds were intentionally erased or buried by the scribes of history. You probably never realized how many empires were shaped not just by kings and generals, but by queens who wielded power from behind the throne, or in some cases, boldly claimed it for themselves. So before you get cozy, hit that like button and subscribe if you appreciate these hidden stories, and don't forget to share your city and local time in the comments. Now, let the soft hum of your fan accompany this slow glide through the lives of these extraordinary women. Imagine yourself walking through the grand halls of a palace where the chandeliers flicker with candlelight, but the portraits on the walls rarely show the women who pulled the strings of power. The great Cleopatra VII of Egypt may be famous, but there are countless others, queens whose influence rivaled kings. Yet their stories are footnotes or footmen's whispers. Take Empress Theodora of Byzantium, for instance. She rose from humble beginnings as an actress to become the wife and co-ruler alongside Emperor Justinian I. You might think her background would have barred her from respect, but historians still argue about how much her political savvy shaped the empire's laws and religious policies. She championed women's rights in a time when women were mostly property, using her influence to rewrite legal codes that still baffle modern scholars. Now think about Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, who in the 3rd century CE led a revolt against the Roman Empire, carving out her own domain in Syria. While Roman historians often painted her as a barbarian threat, modern research highlights her as a cultured, educated leader, fluent in multiple languages and a fierce protector of her people. Her story challenges the notion that queens were mere puppets. She was a warrior and strategist in her own right. Here's a quirky tidbit during the Tang Dynasty in China. Empress Wu Zetian was so controversial that official historians tried to erase her from records altogether. She was the only woman to declare herself emperor in Chinese history, a fact that alone should have ensured her fame. But instead, her reign was shrouded in rumors and demonization. Today, scholars debate whether she was a ruthless tyrant or a progressive ruler, advancing the arts and bureaucracy. You might picture these queens behind heavy velvet curtains, whispering orders that shifted the fate of armies and nations. Some historians still argue about the extent of their power. Were they true sovereigns or just the shadowy hands of their husbands and sons? The answer probably lies somewhere in between, painted with the biases of male scribes who had their reasons to downplay female power. Walking through this tapestry of queens forgotten, you realize power isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, and wrapped in the elegance of silk robes and whispered counsel. These women challenge the male-dominated narrative, often at great personal risk, carving out legacies that shaped cultures long after their deaths. Picture, too, the ceremonial role of queen consorts who, while lacking formal power, influenced diplomacy through marriage alliances and court intrigues. Their success or failure could tip the balance between war and peace, yet their names seldom make the headlines of history textbooks. In fact, many of these hidden queens were also patrons of the arts and religion, fostering cultural renaissances in times of turmoil. Their contributions shaped architecture, literature, and philosophy, but these achievements were credited to the empires rather than the women behind the scenes. One lesser-known but fascinating example is Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt, who disguised herself as a male pharaoh to legitimize her rule. Her reign was marked by peace and monumental building projects, including the famous mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. Despite her success, later pharaohs tried to erase her legacy, chiseling out her name and image. Historians still debate whether her disguise was purely political or if she identified with male authority as a means of survival in a patriarchal society. Then there's Catherine de' Medici, of France, a queen consort who wielded extraordinary influence during a turbulent period marked by religious wars. Often villainized in popular culture, Catherine was a shrewd political operator who balanced Catholic and Protestant factions trying to maintain the fragile stability of the French kingdom. Modern historians question many of the negative portrayals, suggesting that her role as a powerful female regent was sensationalized to undermine her authority. And don't forget Empress Dowager Cixi of China, a woman who effectively controlled the Qing dynasty's government for decades. She navigated palace intrigues, foreign invasions, and modernization pressures with a mix of cunning and ruthlessness. While traditional histories paint her as a conservative obstacle to progress, recent scholarship highlights her complex legacy and efforts to maintain China's sovereignty. These stories show you that queens were often the linchpins of power-balancing diplomacy, war culture, and religion. Their influence extended beyond mere symbolism. They shaped policies, commanded armies, and shaped the fate of millions. Yet their achievements are often relegated to whispers or footnotes. As you lie back and let this slow history wash over you, remember that these hidden queens challenge the idea that power is always visible or male. Their stories demand a closer look, revealing a tapestry of strength woven in silk shadow and strategy. So as you drift closer to sleep, carry with you the memory of these regal women whose legacies survive despite the attempts to erase them. They remind you that history's true power brokers often operate quietly behind the scenes, leaving echoes that ripple through time. You step quietly away from the grand halls and secret chambers of queens to find yourself among the muddy fields and bustling villages where peasants once toiled. Ordinary people who against all odds changed the course of battles and sometimes entire wars. You probably never thought farmers and craftsmen had the power to alter history, but their grit and courage often tipped the scales in ways kings and generals never expected. So before you sink into your chair, take a moment to like and subscribe if these overlooked heroes speak to you. And don't forget to share your city and local time in the comments below. Now, let the soft fan hum blend with my voice as we walk among these unsung peasants who fought history's battles with bare hands and fierce hearts. Imagine the scent of wet earth and the sounds of clanking tools as you join a peasant militia preparing for battle. These aren't soldiers in shining armor, but farmers wielding pitchforks and makeshift weapons drawn from the soil they knew intimately. They might have no formal training, but their knowledge of the land and sheer determination made them formidable opponents. Take the famous Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where English longbowmen, many of them peasants, changed medieval warfare forever. Armed with powerful longbows, these humble archers unleashed volleys of arrows that devastated the French cavalry. Historians still argue about how much their skill versus the muddy terrain contributed to the stunning English victory. Regardless, those peasants, often overlooked, were the real power behind the English triumph. Then there's the story of the Swiss pikemen in the 15th century peasants who took up pikes and halberds, forming disciplined infantry units that defied the heavily armored knights of Europe. Their tactics revolutionized battlefield formations and shifted military power from nobles to commoners. It's a classic underdog tale with spears and sweat. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. During some medieval battles, peasants would use cow dung as a form of camouflage, smearing it on their faces to blend into the battlefield terrain. It's not exactly glamorous, but it shows their resourcefulness and probably made them smell pretty terrible. Imagine trying to sneak up on an enemy while smelling like a barnyard. These peasants weren't just muscle. They were communities with hope spheres and fierce loyalty to their homes. Many of them rose up in revolts like the German Peasants' War in the 16th century, demanding rights and freedoms that would change the social fabric of Europe. Though the revolts were brutally suppressed, their spirit lived on, influencing future generations. In fact, historians still debate whether the peasants' contribution to warfare was more about sheer numbers and desperation or actual tactical innovation. What's clear is that without their sacrifice and courage, many wars would have had very different outcomes. You might picture these peasants standing shoulder to shoulder, not for glory, but for survival. Their battles weren't just for territory, but for the right to live with dignity. Many were illiterate and voiceless in official histories, yet their impact resonates in every corner of military tradition. Think about the French Revolution. Peasants and common folk stormed the Bastille and reshaped a nation. Their collective action echoed far beyond their time, yet many individual stories remain untold. You're hearing echoes of their cries tonight, carried across centuries. And let's not forget the lesser-known stories. Peasant women who smuggled weapons, tended the wounded, and kept the morale alive. Their courage often went unnoticed, but without them, many armies would have crumbled. You're walking alongside nameless heroes, now those who never donned crowns or commanded legions, but whose grit shaped history's tides. As you drift toward sleep, hold on to their quiet strength, the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Pause a moment and imagine the weight of a simple farmer's decision to pick up a sword. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about protecting a family, a livelihood, and a future. Their motivations were raw and real, not always lofty ideals or glory, but survival and love. Yet their actions ripple through time, echoing in the halls of history, even if their names never do. Consider the role of the peasant militias during the English Civil War in the 17th century. These ordinary men, initially untrained, were molded into effective fighting forces by necessity. Their commitment, discipline, and sheer numbers helped shape the outcome of a conflict that changed England's political landscape forever. Historians still debate the extent to which these militias were motivated by ideology versus desperation, but their impact is undeniable. There's also the story of Joan of Arc, often framed as a peasant girl, who rose to lead armies, inspiring French peasants to fight back against the English. While Joan's story is famous, countless other peasants fought alongside her with equal bravery, their deeds lost in the grand narrative of legends. And here's another quirky fact. Some peasant soldiers would adorn their weapons with charms or religious symbols, believing these items could protect them from harm. In a way, these superstitions offered courage and hope amidst the chaos. You can almost picture a tired farmer clutching a worn talisman as he marched to battle the weight of both steel and faith heavy on his shoulders. You might wonder how many battles turned on the loyalty and resilience of these everyday warriors who held lines when nobility faltered or fled. Their steadfastness is a testament to human endurance and communal spirit themes historians continue to explore with fresh perspectives. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, remember these unsung peasants, the backbone of armies, the silent hands that shaped nations. Their stories might be buried beneath layers of time, but their courage remains a quiet flame flickering in the shadows of history. You've wandered through fields and palaces now. Your path takes you to the dimly lit workshops and shadowy labs of unsung inventors of war, those ingenious minds whose creations shifted the tide of battles but never earned a place in your history books. You might think war was only won by soldiers on the front lines, but behind every sword and cannon was a brilliant, often overlooked inventor whose tools reshaped how battles were fought. So before you settle deeper, please like and subscribe if you appreciate these hidden geniuses, and drop your city and local time below. Now let the gentle fan soothe your mind as we uncover the silent architects of war. Imagine stepping into a cluttered forge, the air thick with smoke, and the clang of metal striking metal. These inventors weren't generals or kings, but craftsmen, tinkerers and engineers working tirelessly to create weapons and devices that could save lives or end them more efficiently. Their names might be lost, but their inventions echo through history's greatest conflicts. Take the Greek engineer Ctesibios, often credited as the father of pneumatics, who developed early forms of catapults and water clocks around 250 BCE. While generals deployed his siege engines, Ctesibios himself remains a shadow, his genius overshadowed by the armies that used his creations. Historians still debate how much his inventions influenced the speed and scale of ancient warfare, but his legacy quietly endures. Now picture the medieval blacksmiths who forged the first crossbows. This weapon changed European warfare by allowing less trained soldiers to pierce armor from a distance. It was a game changer, but the craftsmen who made and improved crossbows were forgotten as kings basked in victory. The crossbow's ease of use also caused controversy, with some church leaders condemning it as dishonorable, highlighting the moral debates inventions could ignite. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci sketched blueprints for war machines, including a giant crossbow and a tank-like vehicle. Few of these ideas were built in his lifetime, but his notebooks reveal a mind far ahead of its time. You could almost imagine him tinkering late into the night, the flicker of candlelight illuminating his ambitious designs. Inventors also tinkered with non-lethal devices. Early forms of smoke bombs and chemical irritants were created to confuse and disorient enemies. Though crude by today's standards, these inventions showed a growing understanding of psychological warfare. Historians still argue about how widely these weapons were used and how effective they truly were on the battlefield. The Industrial Revolution accelerated this trend dramatically. Inventors developed rifles with rifled barrels for greater accuracy, repeating firearms that changed infantry tactics, and even early machine guns that terrified armies. The creators of these devices were often industrialists or unknown engineers whose names vanished beneath the roar of gunfire. You might imagine these inventors working under pressure sometimes for kings, sometimes for mercenary armies, always pushing the boundaries of technology. Many risked their lives testing volatile explosives or pushing the limits of metallurgy. Their labs might have exploded, or their inventions failed, but their persistence laid the groundwork for modern warfare. Sometimes these inventors faced moral dilemmas. Did they create weapons to protect their people or to gain power? Their stories often remain untold, but their influence is undeniable. They shaped history not with speeches or battles, but with steel and ingenuity. One lesser-known inventor worth mentioning is Hiram Maxim, who created the first portable machine gun in the late 19th century. While his invention revolutionized warfare with its rapid-fire capability, Maxim himself lived quietly and did not seek the spotlight. His invention drastically increased battlefield casualties, a fact that haunted debates on the ethics of war technology that persists today. There were also inventors behind primitive tanks and armored vehicles during World War I, working feverishly to overcome the deadlock of trench warfare. These machines changed the face of war, yet many of their creators remain obscure names, overshadowed by the generals who deployed their creations. You might smile thinking about inventors who, despite their genius, had their designs stolen or appropriated without credit. History is riddled with tales of brilliant minds overshadowed by those who marketed or militarized their ideas. Historians still argue about the true origins of some famous inventions, reminding us that the story of invention is often as murky as the battlefields themselves. In the end, as you lay back and listen to these stories, remember the silent architects of war, those who never marched to the front, but whose brilliance forged the tools that shaped the destiny of nations. Their legacy is not written in stone or sung in songs, but lives on in every soldier's weapon and every battlefield tactic. You drift away from the forge's smoky haze and find yourself on the turbulent streets and hidden hideouts where rebels once sparked upheavals. Small rebellions that roared louder than their size suggested shaking thrones and toppling regimes, yet their names often lost to the official histories written by victors. You probably never considered how these little-known uprisings carved cracks in empires, but tonight you'll walk among those sparks of revolt that set entire nations ablaze. So before you get comfy, take a moment to like and subscribe if you love these tales of rebellion, and drop your location and local time below. Now, let the soft whir of your fan blend with this slow story of revolt and revolution. Picture a small village square where a handful of peasants and outcasts gather, their faces hardened by years of hardship, but their eyes burning with hope. They might be few, poorly armed and fragmented, but their determination makes them a force no empire can ignore. From whispered plots in taverns to shouted slogans on mountaintops, these rebels challenge the status quo with little fanfare but lasting impact. Take the 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England, often overshadowed by grand royal dramas. Led by a man named Wat Tyler, common folk rose against oppressive taxes and feudal injustices. Though ultimately crushed, this uprising sent shockwaves through medieval society, forcing monarchs to reconsider policies and sowing seeds for future reform. Historians still debate how revolutionary the revolt truly was. but its echoes shaped centuries of social change. Then there's the Boxer Rebellion of 1899 in China, where a secret society of rebels, known as the Boxers, rose against foreign influence and Christian missionaries. Their fierce resistance shocked the world and challenged imperial powers, but their story is often simplified or sidelined in global histories. These rebels embodied nationalist fervor and desperation, and their rebellion ignited debates among scholars about colonialism and resistance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some rebels disguise themselves using animal skins and masks to terrify their enemies, or hide their identities, blending folklore with warfare. Imagine a group of rebels appearing as spirits or beasts, causing confusion and fear in superstitious opponents. Small rebellions weren't always about weapons and violence. Some were about culture and identity resisting forced assimilation or religious persecution. These quiet acts of defiance often sparked larger movements that redrew maps and redefined nations. Historians still argue about the true causes of many uprisings. Were they spontaneous outbursts or carefully planned campaigns? What's clear is that these rebels were often ordinary people pushed to extraordinary lengths, driven by desperation, injustice, or hope. You might picture the risk each rebel took, not just of death, but of erasure. After many revolts, victors rewrote histories to portray rebels as villains or mere criminals, erasing their motivations and humanity. Tonight, you give them voice and space to breathe again. Some rebellions were so small that they didn't change borders or governments immediately, but planted ideas that blossomed into revolutions decades later. The spirit of rebellion is like a spark in dry grass, small, but potentially devastating. And let's not forget the unsung rebel women who organized, spied, and fought alongside men, often hidden behind the scenes, but vital to their cause. Their stories are sometimes hinted at in folklore or whispered in family tales, but rarely find their way into textbooks. One such example is the Taiping Rebellion in mid-19th century China, led by Hong Xiuquan, a man who claimed divine inspiration to overthrow the Qing dynasty. While the rebellion ultimately failed, it caused one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, reshaping China's political landscape. The peasants and rebels who followed Hong risked everything their sacrifices often glossed over in traditional histories. And then there's the Haitian Revolution, the only successful slave revolt that led to the founding of a nation. Led by Toussaint Louverture, enslaved Africans rose against French colonial rule, inspiring freedom movements worldwide. Yet many accounts downplay the scale and significance of this rebellion, overshadowed by Eurocentric narratives. Imagine the resilience required to challenge the might of empires with nothing but hope and makeshift weapons. Rebels often faced brutal retaliation, torture, and execution. Their bravery is etched not in grand monuments, but in the whispered memories passed down through generations. Here's another quirky detail. During some rebellions, rebels would send coded messages hidden in folk songs or embroidered patterns on clothing. These subtle forms of communication helped sustain resistance under watchful eyes. As you settle deeper into this story, consider how these small rebellions, often dismissed as mere footnotes, are actually the seeds from which revolutions grow. They remind you that power can erupt from the most unexpected places, and that even the smallest spark can ignite a fire that changes the world. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, carry with you the fierce spirit of these rebels, forgotten by history, but forever alive in the courage of those who dare to resist. You slip quietly from the smoky fires of rebellion into the shadowy world of spies and secret agents, the hidden puppeteers of history, whose covert actions altered the fate of empires without ever stepping into the spotlight. You probably think espionage is a modern invention, a cloak and dagger game of the 20th century, but the truth is far older and far more intriguing. So before you settle back, like and subscribe if you're fascinated by the unseen hands that guide history, and don't forget to share your city and local time in the comments below. Now let the gentle hum of your fan blend with this slow reveal of history's most elusive heroes. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit room, candle flickering, as a messenger slips you a folded note with secrets that could topple kings. Spies weren't just glamorous agents in suits. They were common people, risking everything, moving through shadows, gathering whispers, and passing coded messages. Their work was dangerous, often lonely, and almost always thankless. Consider the story of Polybius, a Greek historian who also acted as a diplomat and intelligence gatherer in the 2nd century BCE. He studied the Roman Republic's rise, partly through access to secret political and military information. But historians still argue how much of his role was spying versus chronicling. His work influenced later political thinkers, but his own cloak and dagger contributions remain hidden in the folds of time. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where cryptography became essential to survival and victory. The famous Vigenère cipher, though officially invented much later, evolved from simpler substitution codes used by spies to transmit messages safely. These early secret codes were sometimes broken, leading to disastrous consequences for those involved. The balance between secrecy and discovery was a delicate dance, with lives hanging on a single intercepted letter. Here's a quirky tidbit: some spies used invisible ink made from natural substances like lemon juice milk, or even urine messages that only appeared when heated. Imagine an agent nervously holding a letter over a flame, waiting for faint brown script to emerge, revealing the fate of armies or the secrets of monarchs. Spies also mastered the art of disguise, altering their closed speech and mannerisms to blend seamlessly into foreign courts or enemy camps. Their ability to adopt new identities was not just a skill, but a matter of life and death. Yet they rarely had the chance to claim glory for their perilous work. One remarkable figure is Mata Hari, the exotic dancer turned spy during World War I. Though her actual espionage impact remains debated, her story became emblematic of espionage's seductive and dangerous allure. Historians argue about her guilt and the extent of her spying, highlighting how spy stories can be twisted by propaganda and myth. A reminder that truth in espionage is often as elusive as the agents themselves. Espionage wasn't just about gathering information, but also about spreading misinformation, feeding false rumors, intercepting plans, and sabotaging morale. The famous British double agent, the man known only as Garbo during World War II, masterfully fed false intelligence to the Nazis, significantly aiding the Allied invasion of Normandy and altering the course of the war. You might picture these spies as ghosts slipping through the corridors of power, always one step ahead or one step behind discovery. Their stories are shrouded in secrecy, and historians must piece together fragmented clues, debating the truth for centuries. The full extent of their impact often remains buried beneath layers of classified files and forgotten reports. And it wasn't just men. Women often served as spies, using societal underestimation to their advantage. Figures like Nancy Wake the White Mouse repeatedly escaped Nazi capture while guiding resistance fighters and gathering critical intelligence. Her daring missions and unwavering courage highlight the essential role women played in espionage, challenging gender norms of their times. In some cultures, espionage was institutionalized early on. The Persian Empire's king's eyes and ears acted as a vast surveillance network, reporting directly to the monarch. Their existence reminds you that spying was integral to governance and power long before modern intelligence agencies existed. You might chuckle thinking about how some spies used everyday objects as tools. A fan concealing a blade, a book hollowed out to hide papers, or even pigeons trained to carry messages. The creativity required was as much a weapon as any sword, turning the mundane into instruments of survival. Historians still argue about the true impact of many spies and intelligence operations, how much they changed battles or merely added layers of intrigue. What remains clear is that without these silent operatives, history might have unfolded quite differently, their subtle influence shaping events from behind the scenes. As you relax into the night, carry with you the quiet courage of these unseen heroes, people who shaped history not with armies, but with secrets, shadows, and whispers. Their legacy is one of subtle power and silent influence, a reminder that the greatest stories are often those never fully told. You now drift softly away from cloak and dagger shadows and step into the quiet tents and makeshift hospitals where forgotten medics and healers labored not with swords or secrets, but with healing hands and tireless care. You probably haven't given much thought to these silent lifesavers, yet their work shaped countless battles and saved more lives than the bravest warriors. So before you settle in, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you value these unsung heroes, and share your city and local time below. Now let the soft hum of your fan blend with this gentle tribute to history's forgotten healers. Picture yourself walking among the wounded, the sharp scent of herbs mingling with smoke and sweat. These medics weren't just tending cuts and bruises. They battled infection pain and exhaustion while working with scarce supplies. Their tents were a world apart from the clashing armies, a fragile sanctuary of hope amid chaos. Take the story of the Roman valetudinaria, the ancient military hospitals scattered across the empire. These early facilities provided care to soldiers wounded in battle, using surprisingly advanced techniques for their time, such as surgical tools, herbal remedies, and organized care systems. Historians still debate how effective these hospitals were, but they undoubtedly marked a turning point in military medicine. Some even argue that the Roman approach to organized military healthcare laid foundational concepts that echo in modern trauma care. Now think about the role of medics in the Napoleonic Wars, where the French surgeon Dominique Jean Larrey pioneered the concept of flying ambulances, mobile units that rapidly transported wounded soldiers from the battlefield to care. His innovations dramatically improved survival rates and established the importance of timely medical intervention. Still, many medics and their sacrifices remain anonymous, buried in the vast shadow of historical battles. Then there's Florence Nightingale, often called the founder of modern nursing. Though well known, her groundbreaking work during the Crimean War is often overshadowed by tales of generals and battles. Her insistence on hygiene and organization drastically reduced mortality rates and revolutionized how armies cared for their wounded. Nightingale's tireless efforts also emphasize the importance of statistics and data in healthcare, laying the groundwork for evidence-based medical practices today. Here's a quirky tidbit in medieval Europe. Barbers often doubled as surgeons, performing everything from haircuts to amputations. The iconic red and white barber pole symbolized the blood, and bandages they dealt with a stark reminder of the blurred lines between care and combat. Some barbers even wielded razors sharp enough to perform rudimentary surgeries, a role that might make modern patients shudder. Many medics face terrible conditions, from primitive tools to the threat of their own infection. Despite the dangers, they persisted their dedication and act of courage equal to any soldier charging a battlefield. Some even disguised themselves to tend to enemy wounded crossing lines, with compassion as their weapon. These acts of mercy often went unrecorded, but speak volumes about the humanity present even in the darkest conflicts. Historians still argue about the extent to which medical advances in wartime influenced civilian healthcare, but the legacy of these forgotten healers is evident in hospitals and practices still used today. The connection between military medicine and modern trauma care remains a field ripe with research and debate. Think of the unsung women who acted as nurses and healers, often without recognition or records. Their sweat and prayers held the fragile line between life and death, stitching wounds, both physical and emotional. Women like Mary Seacole, who braved war zones during the Crimean War, and countless anonymous caregivers demonstrated unwavering resilience and compassion. You might imagine the quiet moments in these camps, the whispered prayers, the gentle reassurances, the hands that never stopped moving despite fatigue. These healers were beacons of humanity in times of inhumanity, their stories often overshadowed, but never less vital. Consider the invention of early anesthetics and antiseptics innovations that transformed battlefield medicine, yet whose inventors and proponents often remain footnotes. The journey to safer surgeries was long and fraught with trial error and skepticism. These medical pioneers braved not only disease, but social and professional resistance. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the memory of these silent saviors, forgotten medics, whose tireless care changed the fate of countless lives, their legacy woven quietly into the fabric of history. They remind us that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen not in the roar of battle, but in the quiet dedication to saving a life. You leave behind the tents and wards of forgotten healers and find yourself walking alongside the smallest yet bravest heroes, children caught in the throes of conflict, whose courage and resilience defy their years. You probably never stop to think about how children shape the course of wars or inspired nations. But tonight, you'll meet these young heroes whose stories are often whispered, overlooked, or erased. So before you nestle in for the night, take a moment to like and subscribe if you believe courage has no age, and share your city and local time below. Now, let the soft breeze of your fan accompany this gentle journey into the lives of children in conflict. Imagine a battlefield not just filled with soldiers, but also with children, messengers darting between lines, water carriers, braving danger, or even young fighters whose tiny hands gripped weapons heavier than their bodies. These children were witnesses to horror and agents of hope, their innocence clashing with the brutal realities around them. Take the story of the drummer boys in the American Civil War. These boys, sometimes as young as 10, played drums to direct troop movements, their rhythms echoing over fields of smoke and gunfire. Their steady beats were more than music. They were lifelines in chaos. Historians still debate the psychological toll these roles took on such young shoulders. But their bravery is undeniable. Then there's the tale of Joan of Arc, who as a teenager led French armies with a conviction that changed history. Though famous, her youth often overshadows the countless other children who served as scouts' messengers or support in various wars worldwide. Their small actions often had outsized impacts. Here's a quirky tidbit. During World War II, in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, some children acted as couriers slipping through secret passages and smuggling food and information. Their courage in the face of overwhelming odds is both heartbreaking and inspiring. Children in conflict also endured unimaginable hardships, loss, displacement, and forced conscription. Some were even trained as soldiers, a practice condemned today, but common throughout history. Historians still argue how many child soldiers there were in various conflicts, as records are scarce and often deliberately obscured. You might picture these children huddled in basements or makeshift shelters, sharing whispered stories or comforting each other amid the sound of distant artillery. Their resilience was a silent rebellion against the destruction around them. And don't forget the role of children in resistance movements, from collecting intelligence to spreading propaganda. Their small size and apparent innocence sometimes gave them unique advantages, allowing them to move unnoticed where adults could not. Imagine a child barely taller than the barricades, watching friends and family fight their eyes wide with fear and determination. Their stories are often left out of textbooks, but they remain etched in the memories of survivors and in the rubble of war-torn cities. Some historians question the romanticizing of children in war, pointing out the trauma and loss that haunted survivors for decades. Yet these stories of courage remind you that heroism isn't defined by age, but by heart. Consider the role of children during the Vietnam War, where some served as guides through dense jungles or messengers between guerrilla fighters. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain made them invaluable, yet they carried the weight of danger unimaginable for their years. Think also of the young comfort women during World War II, forced into unimaginable suffering. Their stories were suppressed for decades, emerging only recently in global consciousness, reminding us of the hidden costs of war. borne by the most vulnerable. There's the story of Ushijima Keiko, a Japanese girl who joined the resistance as a teenager during the Pacific War, serving as a spy and messenger. Her bravery is a testament to how youth can rise to extraordinary challenges, often without the recognition they deserve. Here's a curious detail. In some conflicts, children were given specially made miniature weapons or uniforms, acknowledging their roles, while also exposing the tragic militarization of childhood. The image of a child soldier with a rifle too large for their hands is both haunting and powerful. You might wonder how these children coped with the psychological scars of war many suffered. In silence, their trauma carried into adulthood. Modern historians and psychologists continue to study their experiences, highlighting the need to remember and support survivors. As you settle deeper into your quiet night, let the stories of these children linger in your mind. The messengers, the fighters, the caregivers, the silent witnesses. Their courage, resilience, and innocence are threads woven through history's darkest nights, shining faint but unyielding. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, carry with you the memory of these youngest heroes, those who, despite their age, stood firm in the face of overwhelming odds, teaching us that bravery truly knows no age. You step away from the youthful echoes of children in conflict and find yourself amidst the salty spray of the open seas, where forgotten pirates and privateers ruled waves, rewriting naval history with cunning and courage. You probably picture pirates as loud, rowdy bandits from stories, but the truth is far richer and far more complex. So before you settle into your chair, take a moment to like and subscribe if you're ready to sail these hidden waters, and don't forget to share your city and local time below. Now, let the soft hum of your fan mingle with the distant crash of waves as we navigate the lives of these maritime outlaws. Imagine the creaking timbers of a ship's sails billowing under a restless sky as a crew of pirates prepares to board their next prize. These were not just lawless thieves, but skilled sailors, navigators, and strategists who challenged empire's naval supremacy. Their daring raids disrupted trade routes and forced nations to rethink maritime defense. Take the story of Anne Bonny and Mary, two notorious female pirates who defied gender norms in the early 18th century Caribbean. Their bravery and ruthlessness earned them legendary status, yet their real lives remain shrouded in mystery. Historians still debate how much of their stories are fact versus folklore, but their impact on pirate lore is undeniable. Then there's the era of privateers, government-sanctioned pirates who blurred lines between patriotism and piracy. Letters of marque authorized them to attack enemy ships during wartime, making them both heroes and criminals depending on perspective. Privateers like Sir Francis Drake were celebrated in England, but reviled by Spain, highlighting the complexities of maritime law and loyalty. Here's a quirky tidbit. Pirates often buried treasure, not because they needed to hide it, but as a psychological tactic to create legends and mislead enemies. The idea of treasure maps with X marking the spot is largely a myth popularized by fiction, yet it adds to the mystique of pirate lore. These seafarers also developed sophisticated codes of conduct, known as pirate articles, which governed behavior aboard ship and distributed loot fairly among the crew. Such democratic practices were radical for their time, challenging the rigid hierarchies of naval vessels and monarchies. Historians still argue about the true scale and influence of piracy. Was it a threat to empires or a fringe nuisance? What is clear is that pirates and privateers shaped naval warfare, commerce, and even international law. You might picture the pirate's life not just as swashbuckling adventure, but as one of harsh discipline, danger, and fleeting freedom. Many pirates were former sailors or escaped slaves seeking agency in a world stacked against them. Consider the impact of piracy on the economy and politics of the Caribbean and beyond. Pirates disrupted trade routes, forced colonial powers to invest in navies, and sometimes forged uneasy alliances with indigenous peoples. And don't forget the cultural legacy pirates left behind: songs, tales, and symbols that continue to captivate imaginations worldwide. Their flag, the Jolly Roger, remains an iconic emblem of rebellion and freedom. Imagine the secret networks pirates used to evade capture with hidden ports and safe havens. Their ability to adapt and survive in hostile waters is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Some pirates became governors and businessmen, blurring lines between outlaw and establishment. Their stories challenge simple notions of good and evil, showing how survival often meant navigating complex loyalties. Historians continue to debate whether piracy helped spread ideas and technologies across continents or simply fostered chaos. What's undeniable is that these forgotten pirates rewrote the rules of the sea and left an indelible mark on history. As you relax tonight, carry with you the daring spirit of these maritime outlaws, bold, cunning, and free. Their legacy is a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who refuse to play by the rules. You slip away from the rugged decks of pirate ships and find yourself in the quiet yet fiercely provocative studios and galleries of forgotten artists who wielded their craft like weapons, challenging powers and reshaping minds without lifting a sword. You probably think artists simply create beauty, but their work often sparked revolutions of thought, shaken regimes, and challenged societal norms. So before you settle back with a sigh, please like and subscribe if you appreciate the power of creativity, and share your city and local time below. Now, let the gentle hum of your fan accompany this slow unveiling of history's artists who changed minds. Imagine dimly lit workshops where artists mixed pigments and carved stone their hands, crafting images and ideas that spoke louder than any proclamation. These artists weren't just painters or sculptors. They were agitators and visionaries who confronted power through symbolism, satire, and subtle defiance. Their studios were often secretive, tucked away to protect them from the watchful eyes of censors and tyrants. Take the example of Francisco Goya, the Spanish painter, whose haunting works, like the 3rd of May, 1808, captured the horrors of war and political oppression. Though famous today, many of his boldest works were censored or dismissed during his lifetime. Historians still argue about the extent of his influence on later movements, but his courage to portray truth remains undeniable. He painted not only what was beautiful, but what was raw, ugly, and brutally real. Images that shocked polite society and challenge the glorification of war. Then there's the role of street artists and pamphleteers during the French Revolution, who used sketches and satirical prints to sway public opinion and mock the aristocracy. Their art fueled revolutionary fervor, though the creators often remained anonymous to avoid persecution. The underground circulation of their work was a silent weapon, spreading ideas that sparked fires of change across Paris and beyond. Here's a quirky tidbit: some artists used hidden symbols in their works, like animals' gestures or colors, to convey secret political messages. Imagine standing before a seemingly simple painting and realizing it was a manifesto disguised in brushstrokes. A dove might represent peace, yes, but also serve as a call to arms or a critique of false peace imposed by tyrants. These coded messages allowed artists to speak truths that couldn't be spoken aloud, slipping past censors and whispering hope to the oppressed. Artists also influenced religion, fashion, and social movements, often pushing boundaries that governments tried to enforce. From the Renaissance's humanist portraits to Dadaism's absurdity during World War I, art was a battlefield of ideas. The Surrealists, for example, challenged conventional reality to expose the subconscious fears and desires suppressed by society. Their work questioned everything from politics to psychology, making viewers uncomfortable and contemplative. Historians still debate whether art's power lies in its beauty or its capacity to provoke change. What's clear is that many artists risked exile, imprisonment, or worse for their work, their bravery etched not on monuments but on canvases. Their legacy is carried forward in every provocative piece that challenges the status quo and invites viewers to question the world around them. Picture an artist in a dim studio mixing paint late into the night, aware that their work could spark dissent or hope. Their creations were often the first cracks in authoritarian facades, the quiet voices of rebellion. The paintbrush was their sword, the canvas their battlefield, and the gallery their secret battleground. Consider the many women artists whose work challenged gender norms, but were sidelined by male-dominated art worlds. Their contributions are only now being rediscovered and appreciated for their boldness and skill. Artists like Artemisia Gentileschi, who depicted strong female figures amidst a patriarchal society, used art to defy oppression and tell untold stories. Their struggles remind you that the fight for recognition in art mirrors the broader struggles for equality and justice. You might think art is passive, but these forgotten creators wielded it as a sharp tool. Their legacy is a reminder that revolutions don't always start with guns. They often begin with ideas painted, sculpted, and sung into the world. Art shapes culture, and culture shapes history in ways that armies never could. The impact of these artists often extends beyond their lifetimes. Movements such as Impressionism, Cubism, and Expressionism challenged established norms and paved the way for modern art, which continues to provoke thought and inspire change today. Their works still hang in museums and galleries worldwide, but their personal stories, full of struggle and defiance, often remain buried. Even now, in the digital age, artists continue this legacy of challenging the status quo, using new media to confront injustice and inspire movements. The lineage of rebellious artists traces back centuries, connecting you here and now with a long history of creators who dared to disrupt and dream. As you drift into sleep, carry with you the spirit of these artists, those who changed history not by force, but by awakening minds and stirring hearts. Their silent revolutions continue to ripple through time, reminding you that sometimes the loudest roar is the quiet stroke of a brush. You ease away from the studios and galleries into the quiet streets and hidden corners where silent protesters once stood ordinary people who wielded peace and patience as weapons to shift the fates of nations without violence or bloodshed. You might think revolutions always roar with gunfire and barricades, but tonight you'll meet those whose quiet defiance echoed louder than any cannon. So before you settle down, take a moment to like and subscribe if you believe in the power of peaceful resistance and share your city and local time below. Now let the gentle hum of your fan mingle with these whispered acts of courage. Imagine standing among a small crowd in a dimly lit square, the air thick with anticipation, but no weapons drawn. The silent protesters use their presence to demand change their unity, a force more powerful than swords. They sit march or simply stand actions that seem simple but carry weighty consequences, each breath heavy with resolve. Take the Salt March of 1930, led by Mahatma Gandhi in India. Thousands walked hundreds of miles to the sea to make their own salt-defying British laws that tax this essential commodity. This peaceful act of civil disobedience sparked a mass movement that challenged colonial rule and ignited hope in oppressed people worldwide. Historians still debate the Salt March's immediate political impact, but its symbolism and legacy in nonviolent resistance remain unparalleled. Imagine the blistered feet, the dusty roads, and the shared chants echoing through villages, a quiet rebellion that echoed across the world. Then there's the story of the silent parade in New York City in 1917, where approximately 10,000 African Americans marched quietly to protest racial violence and lynchings. The protesters dressed in white and maintained strict silence, conveying a powerful message of dignity and demand for justice amidst oppression. The event was organized at a time when racial tensions threatened to erupt into violence, and the decision to march silently was a strategic choice to gain sympathy and attention. Though sometimes overshadowed by later civil rights movements, the silent parade remains a crucial chapter in the history of racial justice. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some silent protests used creative tactics like sit-ins and die-ins, where participants would occupy spaces or lie on the ground, as if dead, disrupting normal life and drawing public attention without uttering a word. These acts frustrated authorities who were unsure how to respond without escalating violence. The Greensboro sit-ins of 1960 are a famous example, but similar actions have occurred worldwide, demonstrating the power of quiet defiance. Silent protests have long been a tool for marginalized groups, from the suffragettes demanding women's right to vote to the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia that toppled communist rule through peaceful demonstrations. These acts required immense courage, often facing brutal repression without retaliation. The strength was in their discipline and moral authority, forcing governments to confront the legitimacy of their rule. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of nonviolent protest versus armed resistance, but many agree that silent protests can galvanize public opinion, attract international attention, and create lasting change in ways violent uprisings often cannot. Nonviolence disrupts the cycle of retaliation, exposing the moral bankruptcy of oppressive regimes. You might picture the vulnerability of these protesters standing firm as tear gas fills the air, or police advance with batons. Their strength lies not in weapons, but in unity and resolve. The simple act of standing together becomes a powerful challenge to unjust systems. Think of the quiet courage needed to face down armed forces with nothing but silence and conviction. Some silent protesters faced imprisonment, exile, or worse yet, their sacrifices paved the way for freedoms taken for granted today. Their stories often lack the drama of battles, but are no less heroic. The moral weight of their protest sometimes carried more influence than entire armies. Consider how these movements inspired global figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Aung San Suu Kyi, who emphasized the power of peaceful resistance. The ripple effects of a silent stand can change laws, topple dictatorships, and redefine societies across continents. Even in the digital age, silent protests take new forms, from virtual sit-ins to hashtag movements, showing that the essence of peaceful resistance adapts but endures. The lineage of silent protesters links you to a long history of individuals who dared to demand change with nothing but their presence. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the quiet power of these silent heroes, those who proved that sometimes the softest voice can echo the loudest, and peace can shake the world. Their legacy is a whisper that turns into a roar across generations. You step away from silent parades and marches and into the shadows of dusty archives, obscure basements, and hidden libraries, where unlikely historians and rogue archivists, many of them without formal training, have fought to preserve the truths that powerful forces wanted buried. You probably imagine history being written by old men in tweed jackets, but some of the most pivotal records of our past have survived not because of governments or scholars, but because of forgotten individuals who risked everything to keep memory alive. So before we slip deeper into tonight's quiet journey, remember to like and subscribe if you believe that forgotten truths deserve to be heard, and share your city and local time below. Now adjust your blanket, listen to that gentle fan hum, and let's meet the guardians of memory. Picture a man in his cramped attic during World War II, typing furiously while bombs fall in the distance. Not a soldier, but a teacher transcribing witness accounts of Jewish neighbors vanishing overnight. Or a woman cataloging banned books and journals under her floorboards in a dictatorship where curiosity is criminalized. These are your unexpected heroes of history, the ones who saved stories not with swords, but with paper and ink. One such figure is Irina Sendler, a Polish social worker during who under the cover of bureaucracy smuggled over 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto and documented their real names and identities on scraps of paper, which she buried in jars beneath an apple tree. Historians still argue about the full scope of her actions. Many believe the number could be even higher, but her efforts were nearly lost to time. For decades, her story remained in the shadows, unearthed only by high school students in the 1990s. Then there's the story of George Orwell, not just the novelist, for 1984, but a tireless collector of banned and radical writings. He built dossiers of political lies, disinformation, and doublethink, not just to inspire novels, but to warn future generations. His archive, as mundane as it seems, note scraps, diary entries, is a defiant monument to preserving uncomfortable truths. Here's a quirky tidbit. In ancient times, rebellious scribes would secretly alter imperial records or leave coded notes in margins to hint at the real version of events. One Egyptian scribe in the 12th century BCE inscribed, "Do not trust everything written in tiny script behind a royal decree, a wink from 3,000 years ago." There are monks who secretly copied censored texts under the threat of execution, citizens who hid microfilm in coat linings during the Cold War, and librarians who risked their lives in Sarajevo to smuggle manuscripts out of a burning national library. The preservation of knowledge has never been neutral. It's often a form of resistance. Historians still debate how much history has been lost to intentional destruction, burned, rewritten, redacted, but many agree that amateur archivists have been vital in preserving what remains. These forgotten heroes remind us that truth is fragile, always under siege, and that sometimes it survives only because someone chose to hide it rather than watch it burn. Imagine a child stumbling across a stack of yellowed letters in a closet, testimonies of survivors, poems written under occupation newspaper clippings of banned protests. And that child unknowingly becoming the next link in a chain of memory keepers. Many of these stories survive because of accidents, documents tucked into boxes, hidden under floorboards, or rediscovered during renovations. Even today, truth needs protecting. In parts of the world, rogue digital archivists mirror Irina Sendler's bravery, capturing evidence of atrocities, storing banned content, backing up whistleblower documents and encrypted servers. History is not just what's written, it's what's preserved. And who dares to remember? Think of the Gulag survivors, whose journals were written on toilet paper, or the Tiananmen Square footage smuggled on VHS tapes across borders. Without ordinary people treating memory like treasure, we might never have seen those images or read those words. There are so many stories we will never know, and yet countless others survive because someone cared enough to keep them. So tonight, as your breathing slows and your room quiets, imagine yourself as one of them, a keeper of stories, a quiet rebel with a pen instead of a sword, a witness who refuses to forget. Because history isn't just recorded, it's protected. You drift gently from the echo of whispered archives into the cold, hard corridors of science, not the gleaming labs of Nobel laureates, but the cluttered workshops, garden sheds, and makeshift observatories of unsung minds who changed the course of human understanding. You might imagine that scientific revolutions begin in ivory towers, but some of the most world-altering ideas were born far from prestigious universities by accident, in obscurity, or even in defiance. So, before the next page of history turns, take a second to like and subscribe if you believe that genius often wears overalls, and let us know your city and time in the comments. Now let's settle in and trace the chalk-dusted paths of forgotten scientific trailblazers. Picture a coal miner's daughter who sketches constellations on the back of receipts, a postman tinkering with wires in his garden shed, or a reclusive polymath whose notebooks lay unread for centuries. These figures didn't wait for permission. They chased curiosity into the unknown, often ridiculed, ignored, or worse, plagiarized. Let's start with Mary Anning, a poor woman from Lyme Regis in early 19th century England who made some of the most important fossil discoveries in paleontology. Without formal training funding or academic recognition, she unearthed the first correctly identified ichthyosaur, and many more. Men in universities took credit. For over a century, she was barely a footnote. Historians still argue whether Charles Darwin himself referenced her work without attribution. Today, she's finally getting a glimmer of the credit she deserves. Or consider Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor in the 1840s, who realized that doctors washing their hands dramatically reduced maternal death rates. Radical right. His idea was dismissed. He was mocked, institutionalized, and died in obscurity. Only decades later did germ theory prove he'd been tragically ahead of his time. Now for your quirky tidbit, in the 1600s, a Dutch lens grinder named Antony van Leeuwenhoek began obsessively looking at pond water through homemade microscopes. What he saw shocked him. Tiny animalcules swimming in every drop. He was the first human to see bacteria. Van Leeuwenhoek wasn't a scientist by title, but his discoveries cracked open the microscopic world. There's even the tale of Rosalind Franklin, whose X-ray diffraction images of DNA revealed its double helix structure. Her work was used without proper credit by Watson and Crick in their Nobel-winning discovery. For decades, her contribution was overlooked. Only in recent years has her brilliance been publicly recognized. Historians still debate how much she knew about what she was seeing, but the data was hers. Or Vera Rubin, an American astronomer who noticed galaxies weren't behaving as they should. Her data pointed toward dark matter, an invisible force holding the universe together. Her male peers dismissed her findings. Today, dark matter is one of astrophysics' greatest mysteries. Rubin's observations were correct all along. These stories remind you that science isn't just lab coats and formulas. It's stubbornness, curiosity, and yes, a bit of rebellion. Many of these unsung scientists worked without funding outside of institutions, driven only by the hunger to understand. Historians still argue, why were these figures ignored? Was it because they lacked credentials? Or because of gender class or race? Likely all of the above. But their ideas survived, sometimes buried in journals, sometimes remembered by students who dared to believe them. Imagine stumbling upon one of their journals in an attic, written in looping script, full of strange observations and half-tested hypotheses. The kind of document that changes everything, but only if someone bothers to read it. In many cases, these thinkers never saw the fruits of their discoveries. Their breakthroughs were dismissed, only to be celebrated long after their deaths. But they pressed on. They asked questions no one else thought to ask. They noticed what others ignored. Even today, innovation sometimes comes from unexpected places, from amateur astronomers spotting comets before space agencies, to teenagers building fusion reactors in garages. The spirit of the forgotten scientist endures in every bold experiment scribbled on the back of a napkin. So as you sink deeper into rest, remember this: some of the world's greatest shifts in knowledge began not in grand lecture halls, but in solitude, in patience, in defiance, in faith that truth matters even when no one's watching. You emerge from the chalky notebooks and dusty labs of hidden scientists and step into fields, not battlegrounds this time, but literal fields, where forgotten farmers, seed savers, and agricultural tinkerers quietly reshape the world by feeding it. You may think of history's heroes as generals or kings, but tonight we meet the people with dirt under their nails, who preserved entire civilizations by cultivating resilience, biodiversity, and food security. So, before we move on, take a second to like and subscribe if you believe growing a plant can be just as revolutionary as writing a constitution. And feel free to drop your city and local time below. Now take a deep breath and let's walk into these furrowed paths of sustenance and stubbornness. Imagine the world without the potato, corn, or rice as we know it. Picture massive famines averted or ignited based on which seeds were planted, stored, or forgotten. Throughout history, agriculture wasn't just about survival. It was about strategy, culture, and revolution. And behind every bite you eat are the hands of those whose names you'll never see in textbooks. Let's start with Nikolai Vavilov, a Russian botanist whose dream was nothing less than ending world hunger. He traveled across 64 countries in the early 20th century, collecting over 200,000 varieties of seeds, believing that genetic diversity could prevent crop failure and famine. But under Stalin's regime, science gave way to ideology. Vavilov was arrested, accused of promoting bourgeois science, and died of starvation in prison. Ironically, a victim of the very hunger he dedicated his life to defeating. Historians still debate how many millions of lives might have been saved had his research been embraced rather than buried. And then there's the quirky tale of the seed library defenders during the siege of Leningrad. As citizens starved during the 900-day Nazi blockade, a group of scientists and seed bank staff protected Vavilov's collection. They refused to eat the edible seeds, some dying of starvation beside sacks of rice and potatoes. Their sacrifice ensured that those seeds would outlive them and grow again. Or consider the story of George Washington Carver, not just the peanut guy, but a visionary scientist and farmer who taught impoverished southern communities about crop rotation, soil regeneration, and sustainable farming long before those became trendy buzzwords. Carver's gentle charisma masked a quietly radical agenda to give black farmers economic independence and dignity through agriculture. He refused to patent most of his innovations, believing they were gifts meant to be shared. Here's a less-known gem, an indigenous woman named Karite from what is now Burkina Faso, who developed techniques for regenerating dead soil by planting trees and legumes, together techniques still used today in parts of Africa to restore degraded land. Her work wasn't documented in journals, but passed down in stories and practice. Historians still argue over her exact origins, but what's clear is that her legacy continues in every sapling taking root in the Sahel. These unsung farmers and growers didn't hold titles or command armies. Their work was quiet, seasonal, often anonymous. But every time they saved a seed, they saved a future. There are others too. The rice breeders in Asia who preserved heirloom strains during the Green Revolution. The guerrilla gardeners who rewilded urban spaces under cover of darkness. The seed smugglers who risked prison to preserve banned crops under dictatorships. Why don't we remember their names? Perhaps because heroism with a hoe doesn't make headlines. Because the fruits of their labor grow slowly. Because revolutions in farming take decades to see. But when they arrive, they feed generations. Imagine a peasant woman in the Andes high above the clouds, gently rubbing a handful of quinoa seeds between her palms, whispering stories to her grandchildren about how her great-grandmother kept this grain alive through drought, war, and disease. That whisper is history too. And in an age of climate crisis, food scarcity, and collapsing ecosystems, their wisdom might matter more than ever. Modern scientists now study the methods of these forgotten growers, hoping that old seeds might unlock solutions for new problems. So, as your eyelids grow heavier, carry this with you, the quiet revolution of those who tilled and sowed, who saved seeds instead of spilling blood, who shaped the world with roots rather than rifles. They remind you that sometimes to change the world, you don't need a microphone or a sword, just a shovel, a sack of seeds, and a heart that believes tomorrow can still grow. You rise from the fertile soil of seed savers and walk into the court's chambers and behind-the-scenes strategy rooms where another kind of power pulses, whispers into ears, quiet suggestions behind thrones. This is the realm of the forgotten political advisors, those who shaped empires, ended wars, or plunged nations into crisis, all without ever wearing a crown. You might think kings and presidents run the world, but so often, it's the shadow behind the throne that turns the gears. So before we tiptoe through these velvet-draped corridors, like and subscribe if you believe the world is run more by whispers than speeches. And of course, let us know your city and local time. Now straighten your invisible cloak and let's slip into history's best-kept secrets. Picture this. A ruler sits at the head of a grand table, flanked by officials in stiff uniforms. But it's the person standing quietly behind their shoulder, the one with no title, no medals, who speaks the words that actually shape tomorrow. The power of suggestion, subtle counsel, and carefully timed silence. These are your ghostwriters of policy. Let's start with Wang Anshi, a Song dynasty reformer in 11th century China. Though technically a chancellor, it was his reforms, not the emperor's whims, that altered the empire's foundations: taxation, education, military service. His policies outlived dynasties, but his name faintly remembered. Historians still argue whether he saved the dynasty or planted the seeds of its fall. And then there's Cardinal Richelieu, the power behind the French throne during the reign of Louis XIII. Richelieu orchestrated wars, built alliances, and centralized royal power. Yet many remember only the king, not the cardinal who pulled the strings. A master of manipulation, Richelieu reshaped Europe while wrapped in red robes and plausible deniability. Here's a quirky tidbit in the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan's mother, often called the Valide Sultan, wielded immense influence. One in particular, Kosem Sultan, advised multiple sultans across generations, at times ruling directly from behind the silk screens. She never wore a crown, but entire policies were hers in disguise. Her life, equal parts palace intrigue and political chess, remains one of history's most underrated power plays. Or consider Abigail Adams, wife of the second U.S. president. But more than a wife, she was a forceful advisor, writing letters filled with sharp insight and clear political strategy. Her famous line, "Remember, the ladies," is often quoted, but her deeper political counsel is less known. Without her, John Adams's presidency might have steered very differently. Not all advisors were welcomed or remembered. Some, like Thomas Cromwell under Henry VIII, were eventually beheaded, scapegoated, for unpopular reforms they had once been trusted to implement. The crown giveth, and the crown taketh away. And it wasn't always in service of good. Some whispered toward war, toward greed, toward conquest. Rasputin in the court of the Russian Tsarina. Alexandra mystic madman or manipulator historians still argue what role he truly played in the collapse of the Romanovs, but few deny the Tsarina trusted his every word to the empire's peril. Or think of kitchen cabinets' unofficial groups of friends and cronies who advised leaders informally. U.S. President Andrew Jackson's kitchen cabinet shaped key policies while bypassing official processes. Power isn't always held by those with titles. Sometimes it's sitting beside them with a knowing smirk. Even in recent times, anonymous speechwriters, personal assistants, and chiefs of staff have redirected history's course with a well-placed phrase or a vetoed sentence. They shape the narrative, decide what gets said and what doesn't. Historians still debate, is the advisor more powerful than the leader, who truly governs the figurehead, or the strategist? Perhaps the more interesting question is, why do we remember one and not the other? Imagine being the person everyone listens to, but no one credits. It's a special kind of ghosthood, immense influence with no spotlight. And yet many advisors seem to prefer it that way. Content to steer from the shadows. These figures remind you that history isn't only shaped by dramatic speeches and coronation ceremonies. Sometimes it turns quietly in candlelit rooms, over whispered conversations, or scribbled notes slid across a table. So as your eyelids grow heavier and your breath evens out, remember that some of the most significant choices in history were made not by those who gave the order, but by those who told them to. You now drift from the gilded corridors of political council into the dusty, blood-stained battlefields, not of warriors with swords, but of the medics, nurses, and field healers who stood between life and death in the chaos of war. Their names were rarely etched into stone, but they stitched together broken soldiers, whispered final prayers, and held trembling hands in the mud. You might picture war as a story of generals and glory, but tonight you'll meet the caretakers of conflict heroes without medals who fought with gauze instead of guns. So if the quiet courage of compassion moves, you take a moment to like, subscribe, and let us know where and when you're listening. Now let's dim the light, hush the world, and walk softly through the field tents of forgotten saviors. Imagine a battlefield at dawn, smoke curling above the horizon, and amid the wreckage, a nurse kneels beside a wounded man, her apron soaked red. No cheering crowds, no statues await her. Only the grim rhythm of saving who can be saved and mourning who can't. Let's begin with Mary Seacole, a Jamaican-born nurse who financed her own trip to the Crimean War after being rejected by British officials, while Florence Nightingale built formal field hospitals. Seacole rode into the battlefield itself, treating cholera, dysentery, and wounded soldiers in brutal conditions. Soldiers loved her. Historians still debate whether racism played a role in the erasure of her legacy, but her bravery and care now resurface in books and bronze. In World War I, nurses like Edith Cavell risked everything, not only treating soldiers of both sides, but helping Allied troops escape occupied Belgium. Her arrest and execution by a German firing squad caused global outrage. She died not as a soldier, but as a caregiver who defied the rules of neutrality in the name of humanity. And there's the quietly revolutionary Clara Barton, who nursed soldiers during the American Civil War and later founded the American Red Cross. Her organization continues to save lives today, but Barton herself often worked alone in the field, refusing to be sidelined by military bureaucracy. A whisper in the chaos of cannon fire, she made her presence known through acts of quiet defiance and care. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medics in WW carried morphine syringes sewn into their boots, not just for patients, but if captured and tortured for themselves. The lines between savior and soldier blurred in those harrowing moments. Countless battlefield nurses and doctors, especially women and people of color, remained unrecorded. In the U.S. Civil War, black nurses worked in horrific conditions without pay or recognition. In Vietnam, medics faced not only enemy fire, but moral injury, treating civilians and enemies alike in jungles where no one was safe. Historians still argue about the psychological toll borne by these caregivers, how many suffered from what we now call PTSD, alone and unsupported. Their wounds were internal, invisible, and often ignored once the war ended. Not all heroes were sanctioned. Some ran illegal field hospitals under occupation. Others stitched wounds in basements, hid the dying from patrols, or smuggled medicine in their skirts. In every war, there were those who chose to heal when others chose to destroy. Imagine a medic in a trench, wiping sweat from their brow, with trembling fingers, already exhausted, knowing another wave of wounded will arrive before they can eat or sleep. Their battlefield is bodies. Their weapon is compassion. And then there were the battlefield inventors, figures like Jean-Henri Dunant, who witnessed the carnage of Solferino and helped found the Red Cross and Geneva Conventions. His trauma became a treaty. His guilt, a global movement. Even in modern conflict zones, these unsung medics persist. In Syria, underground clinics were bombed repeatedly, yet doctors continued operating. In Ukraine, volunteer medics drove toward front lines without armor. The legacy continues not in medals, but in heartbeats restored. Their stories remind you that true courage often bleeds quietly, that the soft hands holding a tourniquet may have done more for a nation than any speech ever delivered. That mercy in the face of war is its own kind of resistance. So tonight, as the room grows quieter and the air cools, carry this with you, the gentle defiance of those who ran toward the wounded, not away, who held lives together with trembling fingers, whose bravery wasn't loud, but life-saving. You leave behind the battlefield bandages and broken bodies, stepping now into corridors lined with books tucked behind chalkboards and whispered through forbidden syllabi. Tonight, you meet the subversive educators, the teachers who taught truth, where lies were law, who planted dangerous ideas in young minds under watchful eyes. You might imagine education as a neutral pursuit, but in times of tyranny, teaching can be treason. So if you believe that passing knowledge can be an act of revolution, go ahead and subscribe, and let us know your city and local time. Now let the murmur of hidden classrooms guide you through the dim corners of courage and curriculum. Picture a woman in an occupied country, chalk in hand, knowing that today's lesson on poetry, of all things, might get her arrested. Or a man instructing students under a flickering basement light while soldiers patrol above. These are not just teachers, they are resistance woven in lesson plans. Take Janusz Korczak, a Polish educator and orphanage director during the Nazi occupation. He ran a home for Jewish children, insisting they be treated with respect and dignity even as their world collapsed. When the children were ordered to the Treblinka extermination camp, Korczak refused multiple offers of escape. He stayed with them. He led them calmly in formation, holding their hands as they walked to their deaths. Historians still argue about what was said in those final moments, but many believe he was telling them a story, one last lesson in courage. And in South Africa, during apartheid, teachers and banned schools taught black students using smuggled materials, defying a regime that tried to restrict education to a tool of control. These underground educators preserved culture, history, and language when the system sought to erase it. Or there's Malalai of Maiwand, a 19th century Afghan teen who, when her village's men fell in battle, rallied them by tearing off her veil and shouting verses of defiance. Though often categorized as a warrior, many believe she spent much of her life as an informal teacher of poetry and national pride. Her story, preserved in oral tradition, became a spark that lit future resistance. And here's a quirky tidbit. In 20th century Czechoslovakia, under Soviet control, samizdat, literature, illegal books, typed by hand and passed from friend to friend, was often taught in whispered gatherings. Reading George Orwell's Animal Farm could get you expelled, fired, or imprisoned. Still, small groups met in kitchens and attics, dissecting forbidden stories, line by line. Why risk so much for a lesson? Because oppressive regimes fear educated minds. They know that an idea is harder to kill than a man. That one well-taught metaphor might live longer than any manifesto. Even in the United States during slavery, teaching enslaved people to read was illegal in many states. Yet brave souls, black and white, did it anyway, teaching in secret, using the Bible or scraps of newspapers. Frederick Douglass himself credited a clandestine education as the key to his freedom. Historians still argue, is the pen truly mightier than the sword? It depends who's holding it. But in every age, tyrants fear the teacher more than the soldier, because a soldier can win a battle. A teacher, they can win a generation. Consider the teachers of indigenous children across the globe who fought to preserve language and culture in the face of forced assimilation. Or women in Taliban-controlled regions who continued educating girls in basements with curtains drawn and textbooks hidden beneath rugs. Imagine sitting cross-legged in one such room. Your teacher's voice is soft but electric. Every sentence is both a lesson and an act of defiance. You glance at the door when footsteps pass, but you don't stop listening. Not all teachers made it. Some were arrested, tortured, disappeared. Others simply lost their jobs, reputations, or health. But they sowed seeds in silence. Their students carried those seeds into the future, into art science revolutions and dreams. Even today, in countries with tight censorship, encrypted PDFs, and online dark classrooms keep this tradition alive. The teacher remains a flicker in the dark, stubborn, and glowing. So as your breath deepens and your mind settles, remember, revolutions often begin not with gunfire, but with grammar. Not with banners, but with books. And that somewhere, even now, a teacher is risking everything to help someone understand just a little more. You step out of the hidden classrooms where forbidden truths passed from hand to hand and into stages draped in velvet alleyways, humming with rhythm, and canvases splashed with colors that scream defiance. Tonight, you'll meet the forgotten artists who wielded brushes, instruments, and words not for fame or beauty, but for rebellion. You might think of artists as dreamy, disconnected souls, but under pressure, art becomes fire. So if you believe in the power of creativity to challenge empires, go ahead, like, subscribe, and let us know your city and the hour you're drifting with us. Now dim the lights just a bit more. We're slipping into the painted, strummed, and whispered world of resistance through art. Imagine this, a violinist playing a forbidden melody at the edge of a war zone. A graffiti artist painting truth on a wall that's meant to silence. A playwright who stages satire in secret, where laughter is the last defense. These are not just artists. They're insurgents with ink and harmony. Let's start with Charlotte Salomon, a young Jewish painter in 1930s Berlin. As the Nazi noose tightened, she created a visual diary, a semi-autobiographical series of over 700 paintings called Life or Theater. She painted feverishly hiding her work before being arrested and murdered in Auschwitz. Her paintings, rediscovered after the war, offer an unparalleled window into one woman's defiance through creativity. Historians still debate whether Salomon's work should be categorized as a novel, a memoir, or theater. But there's no question it was resistance. And then there's Victor Jara, a Chilean folk singer and poet who used his songs to call out injustice during Salvador Allende's presidency. When Pinochet's coup came, Jara was arrested, tortured, and killed, his hands broken so he could never play again. Yet today, his lyrics are still sung in protests around the world. Here's your quirky tidbit. During apartheid in South Africa, record stores had a secret. Anti-apartheid songs would sometimes be mislabeled as gospel or classical music to avoid being banned. Young people knew where to find them, coded in catalog numbers, or slipped under the counter. Listening to them wasn't just entertainment, it was rebellion. Not all of these artist activists were obvious in their politics. Some smuggled messages into beauty. Diego Rivera's murals, for instance, told stories of workers and revolution hidden beneath sweeping grandeur. Ai Weiwei uses sculpture and installation to critique the Chinese government. Though he's been arrested and silenced, his work speaks louder than ever. Some artists use laughter as their blade. Underground comedians in Soviet Russia told satirical jokes about the regime, knowing full well a misstep could mean prison or worse. And still, they joked because in laughter, there's power, there's refusal, there's hope. Historians still argue, can art actually change the course of history, or is it merely a mirror? But ask anyone who lived under censorship, art isn't a mirror. It's a torch. It lights the places power wants to keep in the dark. The Warsaw Ghetto had a secret cabaret. Syrian children's books have smuggled in parables of freedom. Cuban artists created subversive sculptures using government-provided materials, mocking the very system that funded their work. And let's not forget the anonymous street artists. Banksy may be the best known, but countless others risk their freedom each night, painting murals of protest in silence, knowing they'll be whitewashed by morning. Even today, art is a front line. Ukrainian poets write verses under shell fire. Iranian dancers post silent choreographies to band music. In these moments, art doesn't decorate, it detonates. Imagine an old woman in a refugee camp drawing on the wall with a piece of charcoal. A child beside her watches, learning a history that won't be taught in any school. That drawing might last a day, but the memory, it becomes armor. Many of these artists were never paid, never applauded. They created because they had to, because silence was suffocating, because beauty, even in its most painful form, was the only way to scream without being silenced. And as you drift towards sleep, the lines between lullaby and lament blur. Remember that somewhere, someone is painting their truth by candlelight, composing resistance in a song you haven't yet heard. Art doesn't need a museum. It needs only a heartbeat and a refusal to shut up. You leave behind the echoing chords and painted walls of revolution and step quietly into the alleys, kitchens, and open-air shelters of those who saved others, not with weapons, but with refuge. Tonight, we enter the quiet domain of the rescuers, the smugglers, shelterers, and everyday people who risk their own safety to save strangers. These are not warriors, not generals, not saints. Just people who said, "Not on my watch." So if you believe that hiding one life can change the course of many, click like, subscribe, and drop your location and local time below. Now settle in, because tonight we walk with the invisible hands that open doors when the world slammed them shut. Imagine this: a cellar lit by a single candle, a family holding their breath above as soldiers knock on the door, or a shepherd who knows the mountain paths too well, leading fugitives under moonlight through the fog. These people had no power except for their refusal to comply. Let's begin with the story of Chune Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat in Lithuania during Double Fun. Defying his government's orders, he issued thousands of transit visas to Jewish refugees trying to flee the Nazis. He wrote them by hand, hour after hour, even as the embassy was being closed down. His wife reportedly massaged his aching hands so he could keep signing. Historians still debate the final number. Some say $6,000, others suggest it was closer to $10,000. All agree he saved lives with a pen. Or take the lesser-known Noor Inayat Khan, a descendant of Indian royalty who served as a wireless operator for the British Special Operations Executive in Nazi-occupied France. She refused to abandon her post even after capture, enduring torture, and eventually execution. She never gave up a single name. Her code name, Madeleine. Her mission, rescue through radio waves. And here's a quirky tidbit. During the Spanish Inquisition, there were secret signs to indicate a safe house, like a flower pot placed on a certain windowsill, or a folded scarf over a lantern. Entire underground networks of protection grew around these signals, passed down like recipes. The French village of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, a sleepy Protestant hamlet, is a story unto itself. During the Holocaust, nearly every resident participated in hiding Jews, sometimes in schools, sometimes in barns, sometimes in their own homes. The villagers never saw themselves as heroes. They just saw themselves as human. In Rwanda, during the 1994 genocide stories, emerged of neighbors who hid Tutsis in ceilings and pits beneath their floors. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, Buddhist monks concealed intellectuals and children. In Syria, during the Civil War, families risked everything to shelter journalists, medics, and activists. Historians still argue what drives someone to risk everything for someone they barely know. Is it empathy, faith madness, or the quiet conviction that doing nothing is simply not an option? Not all rescuers had grand plans. Some were swept into action by chance, a border official who lost paperwork, a hotel clerk who gave someone a key without asking questions, a taxi driver who took a detour that meant freedom instead of death. Even animals have played a part. Dogs trained to carry false papers. Cats used to distract guards. There's even a documented case of pigeons delivering tiny maps across enemy lines. But most of these stories feature no such theatrics. Just ordinary people standing in the gap. A woman who opens her basement. A teenager who keeps a secret. A priest who locks a church door and lies to the patrol outside, and they paid dearly. Many were caught, imprisoned, executed, erased. Their gravestones, if they had them, carry no mention of what they did. But the people they saved, they lived. They had children. Those children had children. And the echo continues. Imagine waking in the middle of the night to a knock at the door, and instead of fear, choosing to open it. That's the difference between bystander and rescuer. One moment, one choice. Even today, new stories emerge. Volunteers who rescue refugees at sea. Journalists who shield their sources. Hackers who break firewalls to expose war crimes. Different tools, same heart. So as your body stills and the world around you fades into hush, remember that one act of courage can reverberate across generations. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door and let someone in. Now you step through that open door and into a quieter realm. No battlefields, no bombings, no arrests in the night. Tonight's heroes fought on a different front, the body. These were the forgotten healers, doctors, herbalists, midwives and caretakers, whose names never appeared in medical journals, but whose hands brought life back from the brink. You might not expect medical miracles to come from dusty huts or forgotten alleys, but tonight they do. So if you believe healing is as heroic as any charge into war, take a moment to like, subscribe, and tell us your city and local time. Now close your eyes and let your breath fall into the rhythm of pulse, whisper, bandage, repeat. Imagine a child coughing in the dark. A healer arrives, not in a lab coat, but with a satchel of herbs, a voice like calm water, and fingers that have felt 1,000 fevers. There's no certificate, no hospital bed. But healing happens here quietly, stubbornly. Let's begin with James Barry. Born in the late 18th century, Barry served as a brilliant British Army surgeon who dramatically improved sanitation in military hospitals, performed one of the first known successful C-sections in Africa, and advocated tirelessly for better conditions for soldiers and the poor. After death, it was revealed that Barry had been assigned female at birth and lived as a man his entire adult life. Historians still debate whether Barry transitioned by choice or out of necessity to practice medicine, but his legacy remains one of dedication and compassion no matter the name or gender. Or consider Juana Ramirez, known as La Avanzadora, who served both as a combatant and as a battlefield nurse during Venezuela's War of Independence. Her dual role was rare, but her devotion even more so. Between musket fire and chaos, she dressed wounds and carried bodies. She wasn't just a healer. She was strength embodied. And for your quirky tidbit, in medieval Europe, barber surgeons performed tooth extractions, bloodletting, and even amputations with their red and white poles, symbolizing both the towel white and blood red. You thought your last haircut was risky. Across centuries, midwives bore the immense responsibility of guiding life into the world, often unassisted. In many cultures, midwives were spiritual protectors as well as medical caretakers. They memorized plant lore, managed breech births, and sometimes against the laws of their land, taught women about their own bodies in ways the state forbade. In Japan, Yamato Nadeshiko healers combined ritual chant and medicinal roots. In West Africa, griots passed down both healing knowledge and history in song. In the Caribbean Obeah, women provided remedies and spiritual counsel under the shadow of colonial rule. During epidemics, cholera, smallpox, Spanish flu, it was often not the elite physicians who saved the most lives, but the local nurse who knew when to cool a fever, when to boil the water, and how to cradle a dying man until morning. And yes, many of these healers were punished, branded as witches, accused of practicing illegal medicine. Their knowledge burned their graves unmarked. Historians still argue whether this erasure was about medicine or power. Take the enslaved healer, known only as Mammy Rachel, remembered in whispers from the American South. She knew root lore, made poultices from moss and bark, and delivered babies under moonlight while hiding from patrolling overseers. Her tools were stolen. Minutes remembered prayers and instinct. Even during wartime, unconventional medics emerged. Vietnamese doctors, unable to access supplies, used bamboo tubes as splints and banana leaves as antiseptics. Jewish physicians in Nazi ghettos used soap and smuggled aspirin to manage typhus outbreaks. These weren't improvisations, they were lifelines. In modern times, some of this legacy continues in community clinics, refugee camps, and rural hospitals. In places without power, hope runs on candlelight gauze and human touch. And still, we rarely know their names. No Nobel, no headlines. But ask the person whose fever broke at dawn. The mother whose baby took its first breath. The soldier whose leg was saved. They remember. Imagine a quiet room, the air thick with incense and breath. The healer leans in. You don't know her name, but you believe her. She wipes your brow and tells you softly, you're not alone. So as your breath deepens and your limbs go slack, carry this truth with you. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't charge into danger. They walk into suffering and sit beside it until it eases. They don't ask for medals. They just listen and soothe and stay. From the quiet wards and whispered rituals of healing, you now drift into the cold laboratories, cluttered workshops, and lightning-lit towers of forgotten inventors, the ones who reshaped your world yet somehow missed their chapter in the textbook. They were the tinkerers and thinkers who toiled alone, scribbling formulas by candlelight, building prototypes in sheds, or muttering to themselves in patent offices. So if you've ever flipped a switch or pressed a button and felt a little wonder, hit like, subscribe, and let us know your time and place tonight. Now lean back, let the hum of electricity wrap around you, and listen closely. These are the makers who shaped everything and got little in return. Picture it, a man holding up a piece of metal to the stormy sky waiting for the spark. Or a woman grinding minerals in her cramped apartment, chasing a color the world had never seen. They weren't always after fame, just truth. Or maybe just obsession. Let's begin with Mary Beatrice Davidson Kenner. You've likely never heard her name, but you've benefited from her brilliance. She invented the moisture-proof sanitary belt in the 1950s, an early version of the modern menstrual pad. It was revolutionary. But when the company who initially showed interest discovered she was black, they withdrew. She never received widespread recognition in her lifetime. Still, her design was eventually used across the globe. Historians still argue how many other inventions were similarly erased due to race or gender bias. Then there's Nikola Tesla. Yes, you may know the name now, thanks to a flashy car company, but in his lifetime, he died nearly penniless and alone. The man who gave us alternating current electricity radio waves and remote control was mocked by rivals, particularly Edison, who backed the losing and more dangerous direct current. Tesla's ideas were often so advanced they felt like magic, and for many, they still do. And here's a quirky tidbit. In 1816, a German optician named Carl Zeiss began crafting microscopic lenses so detailed that when later engineers revisited them under better tech, they couldn't figure out how he achieved such clarity. Some suspected divine intervention. Others suspected he just never slept. Think of Garrett Morgan, the Black American inventor who gave us the modern traffic light and the gas mask. He saved lives with that second invention during a tunnel explosion in 1916 using the mask himself to rescue trapped workers. And yet newspapers often failed to name him, or mentioned only that a local man had stepped in. In the field of computing, Ada Lovelace, daughter of Lord Byron, wrote what many consider the first computer algorithm in the mid-1800s. Long before the first computer was built, she imagined how one might calculate complex equations. Charles Babbage, her collaborator, often got the credit. But today, Ada stands quietly in the background of your screen behind every app, every AI, every digital whisper. Historians still debate who truly invented the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell patented it, but Italian inventor Antonio Meucci had a working model earlier. He couldn't afford to renew his temporary patent. When Bell filed years later, he became a legend. Meucci became a footnote. Even in medicine, brilliant minds were forgotten. Rosalind Franklin produced the X-ray diffraction images that helped decipher DNA's double helix. Watson and Crick won the Nobel. She died young. her contribution for decades barely mentioned. And there are the inventors who changed everything, but stayed anonymous by choice. The creator of the first functional digital anonymous remailer, paving the way for online privacy. The designer of the world's most efficient low-cost water purifier, used now in refugee camps, who refuse to sell it for profit. The reasons for obscurity vary: timing, gender, race, politics, or just bad luck. Some were sabotaged. Others lacked connections. Many simply didn't want the spotlight, they just wanted the idea to live. Imagine one of them, hunched over a cluttered desk at 2 a.m. soldering wires, together with shaking hands, convinced they're on the verge of something extraordinary. They don't know the world will forget their name. They only know it might work. And even now, in garages and college dorms, someone's building the next breakthrough. A girl in Indonesia who's coding an AI for disaster warnings. A teenager in Brazil with a solar-powered filtration backpack. They might never make headlines, but someday you might use what they built, never knowing who to thank. So as your eyelids grow heavy and your thoughts scatter like stardust, remember, the world you live in runs on invisible ingenuity. Quiet, stubborn, relentless. A light bulb, a heartbeat monitor, the wheel, the web. All born from a forgotten genius who dared to say, "What if now?" You leave behind the flickering glow of forgotten inventions and wander into another kind of brilliance, the kind that hums quietly between words, thrives in metaphor, and survives in silence. Tonight, you meet the lost storytellers, the exiled poets, the censored writers whose voices were once smothered but never quite extinguished. You might think literature is safe, just paper and ink. But when the truth is dangerous, stories become weapons. So if you believe a whispered poem can outlast 1,000 regimes, click like, subscribe, and tell us your city and local time. Now, hush. We're opening a book that was once forbidden. Imagine this: a woman scribbles a line of verse into a piece of cloth, then sews it into her coat so the guards won't find it. Or a man in a labor camp murmurs a folk tale to a child each night, knowing memory is the only safe library left. These are the heroes who fought not with swords, but with sentences. Begin with Anna Akhmatova, the Russian poet, who became the conscience of her people during Stalin's purges. Her poems, often unwritten, just memorized and shared between trusted friends, gave voice to grief, fear, and defiance. Requiem, her elegy to the imprisoned and executed, wasn't published in the Soviet Union until decades after her death. Historians still debate how she survived so long without exile or execution, but perhaps it was because her silence in public only deepened the thunder of her words in private. Or consider Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese literary critic and Nobel Peace Prize winner who spent years imprisoned for his political writings and human rights advocacy. While locked away, he wrote poetry for his wife, imagining her smile as a candle in the dark. His words were smuggled out sometimes, just a single line at a time. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the Chilean dictatorship of Pinochet, poets and dissidents passed forbidden manuscripts inside hollowed-out loaves of bread, literal food for thought. In apartheid-era South Africa, protest poetry, written in native languages, was recited at funerals and gatherings passed along orally to avoid police detection. It was the rhythm of rebellion, disguised as mourning. Throughout history, banned books have held special power. The more they were burned, the more they were read in secret. In Nazi Germany, the White Rose Resistance Group distributed anti-Hitler leaflets that quoted Goethe, Schiller, and even the Bible. Hans and Sophie Scholl, students and siblings, were executed for their words. But those words lived on. Even in the quietest corners of exile, writers persisted. James Baldwin fled racism in America to write in Paris. Alexander Solzhenitsyn chronicled Soviet labor camps from within. Mahmoud Darwish carried the voice of Palestine in his verses across the world. Historians still argue, does literature lead revolutions or simply record them? But to anyone who's ever clung to a banned book like a lifeline, the answer is clear. Stories shape the soul, and a shaped soul becomes ungovernable. Sometimes the hero wasn't the author, but the translator. Like Constance Garnett, who brought Russian literature to the English-speaking world. Or the many anonymous hands that translated subversive works into dozens of languages, often at great personal risk. Some works survived only in fragments. Others were lost entirely until discovered decades later in attics, prisons, or smuggled microfilm. A single phrase found scribbled in the margin of a diary can resurrect an entire lost world. And some stories were simply never told in the first place because their tellers were silenced before they could speak. Still, the urge to tell remains. In refugee camps, in prison cells, in censored classrooms, someone always begins. Once upon a time, even today, regimes fear literature. In countries with strict censorship, books are still banned, journalists, jailed poets, surveilled. But people still write. They hide manuscripts and code. They turn to graphic novels, spoken word, social media. The story always finds a way. Imagine a dark room just before dawn. A hand reaches for a hidden notebook. The words come slow, soft, like breathing. They are dangerous. They are necessary. They will survive. So, as your breath deepens and your dreams begin to unfurl, remember this: the world has been stitched together, not just by warriors, but by words. And somewhere even now, a voice you've never heard is writing a line that might save someone someday. You step from the quiet reverence of words into the final corridor of this long, winding journey. Tonight, you meet the anonymous, the unknown, unnamed, undocumented heroes whose deeds echoed through time, but whose identities have vanished. They are the shadows behind the spotlight, the reason some histories even happened. You might not find them in textbooks, but you'll find them etched into everything around you. If you believe history is shaped just as much by those forgotten as those remembered, go ahead and subscribe, and let us know your time and place tonight. Now, close your eyes. Let's walk once more into the hush of time's blind spots. Imagine this: a child lifts a bucket to help dig a trench during a siege. An old man in a village lights a lantern so refugees can pass without tripping. A stranger wraps a bandage, gives up bread, holds a hand. They don't ask for thanks. They aren't remembered in statues, but without them, the great names would never have made it. Start with the builders of cities, cathedrals, and civilizations. No one remembers the names of the thousands who carved stone at Angkor Wat or aligned the great blocks of the pyramids under starlight. yet their fingerprints still linger on those stones. Each chisel mark a whisper, "I was here," then the runners. During times of war, couriers risked everything to carry messages across enemy lines. Some were trained soldiers. Many were not. Children were used in both world wars, darting between houses, crossing rivers, hiding notes in their shoes. One 12-year-old Belgian girl was caught delivering letters and hanged. Her name lost. But the letter reached its destination. Here's a quirky tidbit. In medieval monasteries, anonymous scribes left occasional snarky marginal notes in illuminated manuscripts complaining of cold fingers or poor ink. Even the invisible had personality. And then there are the anonymous funders, those who gave money, food, shelter, often in secret. In the civil rights movement, many white Southerners donated under false names, afraid of backlash. Without them, bail wouldn't have been paid. Rallies couldn't have fed volunteers. They never took the stage, but they built it. In revolutions across time, from Haiti to Hungary, there were cooks, water carriers, signalers. No medals, no biographies. But without them, the movement would have starved or gone silent. Historians still argue, how do we honor those we cannot name? Some say we remember through rituals. Others say we reconstruct with statistics and guesswork. But maybe the point is this: we honor them by seeing the invisible, by asking, who else was there? Even in more recent events, many of the brave remain nameless. The woman who filmed police brutality on her phone, the stranger who pulled someone from a flood, the neighbor who hit a child during a raid. They vanish into the noise of headlines, but their impact lingers. And there's power in not being remembered, in doing what's right with no reward, in being the hand in the crowd that lifts someone up and then slips away. Imagine a forest path at night. A stranger leads you through thickets. They never tell you their name. At dawn, you're safe, and they're gone. That's the story of thousands, perhaps millions. And perhaps someday you'll be one of them. Now, as your journey draws to its end, your limbs heavy, your breath deep, and even carry this final truth: history isn't written only by the boldest or the loudest or the most famous. It's also written by quiet hands, anonymous hearts, and people who said yes to courage and no to being seen. So here we are, soft landing from centuries of shadows and silence. You've walked through empires and alleys, through battlefields and back streets, through poetry and protest and invention and grace. You've stood beside heroes who weren't in your school books, whose names were whispered or never spoken at all. And still, they shaped the world. Now, let the hum around you settle. Let your breath slow. Sink deeper into your blanket or your pillow or the night itself. Let your muscles release one by one, shoulders, jaw, fingers. Let the stories blur and the voices fade into something distant and kind. There's no test at the end of this class. No final exam. No required notes. Just the knowledge that humanity is deeper than you thought. That behind every headline was someone forgotten. And that maybe, just maybe, they were the reason the story kept going. So rest easy now. Let the names disappear. Let the silence rise. The world is still turning. And somewhere another forgotten hero is already getting to work.